There is a kind of exhaustion that has settled over our world that no amount of rest seems to cure. It is not a physical tiredness, though many people carry that too. It is something deeper, a weariness of the soul that comes from navigating a world that has become almost incomprehensibly complex, morally disorienting, and spiritually noisy. We are a generation that has access to more information than any human beings who have ever lived on this earth, and yet the sheer volume of that information has not made us wiser. In many ways, it has made us more confused, more anxious, more susceptible to manipulation, and more uncertain about what is actually true and what actually matters. We are swimming in data and starving for wisdom. Every single day, the average person is bombarded with thousands of messages, from news media, from social platforms, from advertising, from entertainment, from the voices of friends, colleagues, family, and strangers, all of them competing for attention, all of them making some kind of claim about how you should live, what you should value, what you should fear, what you should want, and who you should be. The noise is relentless. And in the middle of all of it, the most important questions of human life. How do I build something that lasts? How do I treat other people well? How do I manage my emotions and my impulses? How do I make decisions I will not regret? How do I find genuine peace? Often go unaddressed, or worse, get answered by voices that have no business speaking into them. This is precisely the world into which the book of Proverbs speaks. And what is remarkable, what is genuinely extraordinary when you sit with it, is that it speaks not as a relic from a distant past, but with a freshness and a precision that feels almost uncomfortably current. The human beings who needed these words 3,000 years ago were navigating the same fundamental tensions we are navigating today. They were struggling with pride and its consequences, with the management of their speech, with the temptations of dishonest gain, with the erosion of integrity under pressure, with the difficulty of relationships, with the management of their inner world, with the question of whether God was actually present and actually engaged in the details of their lives. The names and the technologies have changed. The essential human story has not. The book of Proverbs is attributed primarily to King Solomon, the son of David, to whom God granted wisdom beyond that of any other human being who had lived before him or who would come after him. In 1 Kings, we are told that God appeared to Solomon in a dream and invited him to ask for whatever he wished. And Solomon, given the opportunity to ask for anything, wealth, military power, long life, the destruction of his enemies, asked for wisdom. He asked for a discerning heart that would allow him to govern well and to distinguish between right and wrong. And God was so moved by this request, so pleased that Solomon had asked not for personal advantage, but for the capacity to serve others rightly, that he gave him not only the wisdom he asked for, but the wealth and honor he had not requested as well. What flowed from that divine gift was extraordinary. Solomon became a man whose wisdom was so renowned that rulers traveled from distant lands simply to hear him speak. He wrote 3,000 proverbs and composed over 1,000 songs. He understood the natural world, from the behavior of animals to the patterns of plants. He presided over the greatest era of prosperity Israel had ever known. And in the book of Proverbs, the distilled essence of that divine wisdom was preserved and offered to every generation that would follow, not as an exclusive inheritance for kings and scholars, but as a gift available to any person willing to receive it with humility and apply it with faithfulness. But Proverbs is not only Solomon, it is a collected wisdom shaped by multiple voices under the inspiration of the same Spirit. There are contributions attributed to Agur and to King Lemuel, and the book closes with the extraordinary portrait of the woman of noble character, a final, comprehensive vision of what wisdom looks like when it is fully embodied in a human life. Together, these voices create a rich and multidimensional portrait of the life God intends for human beings. A life of integrity, of thoughtful speech, of generous love, of practical diligence, of humble reverence, and of genuine peace. We are going to journey through 31 timeless truths from this extraordinary book. 31, one for every chapter, one for every day of a month, one for every season of life that calls us back to the foundations. These are not simply interesting ideas to be appreciated and filed away. They are living principles that, when genuinely received and faithfully applied, have the capacity to transform every dimension of your life. Your relationships, your work, your finances, your emotional health, your speech, your character, and your relationship with the God who made you and loves you more than you have yet been able to fully comprehend. Come into this with an open heart. Do not simply read or listen for information. Listen for what God might be saying specifically to you in your specific season, with your specific struggles and your specific questions. Wisdom is not a general resource available to everyone in the same impersonal way. It is personal. God's wisdom meets each of us where we actually are and addresses what we actually need. Be attentive. Be receptive. Let the ancient voice of Proverbs speak into your modern life and expect it to say something you genuinely need to hear. Before we begin our journey through these truths, I want to take a genuine moment to connect with you personally, because this is something that truly matters to me. If you are watching this video right now, wherever in the world you are, whether you are in North America or the United Kingdom, in Africa or Asia, in Australia or South America, in a quiet room or a busy moment you have carved out just for this, I would love to know where you are. Please drop your city or your country in the comments below. Just a simple hello, just your location, just a word that lets me know you were here. Every time I read those comments, I am genuinely moved. People from countries I have barely visited, from cities I have only seen on a map, from backgrounds and cultures and stories so different from one another, and yet all gathered in the same place, around the same word, hungry for the same wisdom. That is something I find deeply beautiful, and I never take it for granted. And because this community is something I genuinely care about and want to see grow, I want to ask you, warmly, sincerely, and with real emphasis, please subscribe to this channel if you have not done so already. Not just as a casual click, but as a real decision to invest in something meaningful. This channel is built on the belief that God's Word has something to say to every person in every generation, and that studying it carefully and faithfully together is one of the most worthwhile things we can do with our time. Every person who subscribes makes this community stronger, more visible, and more capable of reaching the people who need this kind of content most. Please subscribe. It means more than you know. I also want to extend a warm and heartfelt invitation to consider becoming a channel member. Membership is the way to go even deeper with this community. Members get early access to new videos before they are released publicly. They become part of an inner circle that is building something together week by week, and they get to participate in a level of connection that goes beyond simply watching. The global reach of this community is one of its most extraordinary qualities. There are members from dozens of countries, people who have never met in person, and yet share a bond formed by the pursuit of wisdom and the love of God's Word. If that resonates with you, the join button is right there near the subscribe button, and I would be genuinely honored to have you as a member. Now let us open the book of Proverbs together and let its wisdom speak. First truth, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Proverbs 1:7 announces the entire program of the book with a single foundational declaration. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. There is no principle in Proverbs more important than this one, and no principle more misunderstood. In our contemporary culture, the word fear applied to God often produces discomfort. It sounds primitive, as if we are meant to cower before an arbitrary and capricious deity who might strike us down for any misstep. But this is a profound misreading of what the biblical concept of the fear of the Lord actually means, and getting it right is absolutely foundational to everything else Proverbs has to teach us. The fear of the Lord, as Proverbs and the broader wisdom tradition of Scripture understands it, is not a paralyzing terror. It is a reverent awe, a deep, settled, conscious recognition of who God actually is. It is the acknowledgement that He is the creator of all things and the sovereign ruler of all reality. It is the recognition that He is completely holy, meaning He is utterly without moral blemish, and that His standards of righteousness are not suggestions, but the very fabric of the universe's moral order. It is the understanding that He is not distant or indifferent, but personally, intimately aware of every corner of our lives. Every thought we think, every word we speak, every motivation that drives our choices, every secret we carry in the places where no other human being can see. This kind of fear is not the opposite of love. It is actually deeply intertwined with love. When you genuinely love someone, and also recognize their greatness, their moral excellence, and their capacity to see you completely, something like reverent awe is the natural response. The father who watches his young child approach the edge of a cliff feels a kind of fear that is entirely driven by love. The person who stands at the edge of the Grand Canyon and feels their smallness acutely is experiencing something that the Bible would recognize as a seed of the fear of the Lord, the visceral recognition that you are not the largest thing in the universe, that there is something vastly greater than yourself that you must reckon with. Now here is why this is so central to everything in Proverbs. This fear, this reverent, awe-filled recognition of who God is described as the beginning of wisdom, not a component of wisdom, not one ingredient among many, the beginning, the starting point, the soil in which all genuine wisdom grows. You cannot build the house of a wise life on any other foundation. You can be highly intelligent, you can be exceptionally educated, you can be strategically gifted and practically skillful. But if the foundation of your life is not this reverent fear of God, the wisdom you construct will be, at its core, unstable. It will be wisdom oriented around the wrong center, around yourself, around the approval of others, around the accumulation of power or comfort or status, and that misdirection will eventually show up in the choices you make and the life you build. The practical implication of beginning with this truth is significant. It means that every other decision we make, every value we hold, every relationship we navigate, every ambition we pursue, must be held up against the question of whether it honors the God who made us and in whose sight we live every day. That is not a limiting framework. It is actually the most liberating one available to a human being because it gives us a fixed point of reference in a world where every other reference point is in constant flux. When God is your true north, you can navigate even the most disorienting landscape without losing your way. The fear of the Lord does not narrow your life. It centers it. Second truth, trust in God, not in your own understanding. Proverbs 3:5-6 is one of the most beloved passages in all of Scripture, and its familiarity should not cause us to move past it too quickly. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your paths. These verses have been memorized by millions of people and quoted in thousands of sermons, and yet the depth of what they are actually calling us to is something that most of us are still learning to genuinely live. Begin with the instruction to trust with all your heart. The emphasis on all is deliberate and significant. Partial trust is not the posture Proverbs is describing. It is not the arrangement in which we trust God with the spiritual dimensions of our lives while managing the practical dimensions entirely on our own terms. It is not the situation in which we follow God's leading when it aligns conveniently with where we already wanted to go, but quietly override His direction when it conflicts with our own plans. All your heart, total, whole, unreserved. The kind of trust that holds nothing back because it has genuinely concluded that the one it is trusting is completely trustworthy. The instruction not to lean on your own understanding requires a careful unpacking, because it is not a call to intellectual passivity or to the abandonment of careful thought and analysis. God gave us minds and fully intends for us to use them. The issue is not thinking carefully. The issue is what we ultimately rest our full weight of confidence upon. The word lean here suggests the posture of someone who has transferred their body weight onto something, the way you lean on a wall or a railing. Leaning on your own understanding means treating your own perspective and your own analysis as the final, sufficient authority on what is true and what should be done. And the problem with that posture is not that our understanding is worthless, it is that it is limited, profoundly, irreducibly limited. We see only a fraction of the full picture. Our perspective is shaped by our past experiences in ways that we are not always able to see clearly. Our desires and fears influence our conclusions in ways that feel like reason, but are actually rationalization. Our vision of the future is genuinely partial. We cannot see what is coming. We cannot know the full consequences of our choices before we make them, and we cannot account for the countless factors that lie outside our field of vision. Leaning on our own understanding as the ultimate authority is placing all our weight on a support that is not strong enough to hold it. Acknowledging God in all your ways is the practice of bringing Him into every aspect of life, not just the obvious spiritual decisions, but the daily choices, the mundane crossroads, the small moments of temptation and opportunity that together make up the fabric of a human life. It is the habit of pausing before you act, of asking for guidance before you speak, of submitting your plans to God's review before you execute them with confidence. People who have developed this habit describe it not as a constraint, but as an enormous relief, the relief of not having to carry the full weight of every decision alone. And the promise attached to it is direct and beautiful. He shall direct your paths, not might, not may, shall. The God who sees everything, who knows the beginning from the end, who loves you with a love that is beyond your capacity to fully measure, will direct the paths of those who genuinely trust and acknowledge Him. That is a promise worth building your entire life upon. Third truth, guard your heart above all else. Proverbs 4:23 contains what may be the most far-reaching command in the entire book. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Udiku, 3 words, set the stage for everything that follows. Above all else, this is not Proverbs saying that the heart is an important thing to pay attention to among other important things. This is Proverbs saying that the condition of your heart, the state of your inner world, is the single most consequential variable in your entire life. More important than your skills, more important than your relationships, more important than your financial situation or your career or your reputation. Everything you do flows from it. Every word you speak, every decision you make, every relationship you build or destroy, every habit you form, every character quality you develop or neglect, all of it originates in the heart. The heart, in the Hebrew understanding that informs Proverbs, is not simply the seat of the emotions, as we tend to think of it in modern Western culture. It is the center of the whole person, the place where intellect, emotion, will, desire, belief, and identity all converge. It is what we would call the core self. When Proverbs speaks of the heart, it is speaking about the deepest, most defining dimension of who you are, the place from which everything else in your life ultimately proceeds. Understanding this should change how seriously we take the cultivation of our inner world. Most of us spend the vast majority of our effort managing the external dimensions of our lives, our appearance, our performance, our productivity, our professional image, our social presentation. We work very hard to manage how we are perceived by others while paying relatively little disciplined attention to what is actually happening inside us. But Proverbs is telling us that this is precisely backwards. What is going on in the inside determines what eventually shows up on the outside. You cannot maintain a consistently beautiful external life if the interior is disordered, wounded, neglected, or corrupted. It will surface eventually. It always does. Guarding the heart means being intentional and discerning about what you allow to enter your inner world and take up residence there. It means being selective about the content you consume, because content shapes thought and thought shapes character. It means addressing bitterness and unforgiveness rather than suppressing them, because what is unaddressed does not disappear. It grows in the darkness and eventually poisons everything it touches. It means being honest with yourself about the narratives you are telling yourself about your own identity, your own worth, your own story, because false narratives internalized over years can be more limiting than any external obstacle you will ever face. It means managing what you dwell on, what you replay in your imagination, what you allow to define your emotional landscape. None of this is easy. Guarding the heart is perhaps the most demanding discipline in the entire Proverbs curriculum, because the heart is not fully visible even to ourselves. We are not always aware of what has settled in us, what assumptions we have absorbed without examination, what wounds have shaped us in ways we have not acknowledged. This is why Proverbs pairs the command to guard the heart with the foundational instruction to fear the Lord and to seek wisdom from above, because only God can truly see the heart completely, and only His word is sharp enough to cut through its layers and reveal what is actually there. The practice of guarding the heart is ultimately a spiritual practice. It requires honesty before God, the courage to face what is there, and the consistent work of aligning your inner world with His truth. Fourth truth: words carry the power of life and death. Proverbs 18:21 makes one of the most provocative statements about human speech in all of literature. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Not the ability to influence slightly, not a modest capacity to affect others, the power of life and death. And the extraordinary claim embedded in that phrase is not hyperbole. It is one of the most rigorously confirmed truths in human experience. Think for a moment about the words that have most significantly shaped your own life, the words that have lifted you, that you still carry with you as sources of strength and identity, and the words that have hurt you, that you have perhaps spent years working to get free from. Most of us can identify specific sentences spoken to us, sometimes by people who have long since forgotten saying them, that have lived in us for decades. Words spoken in a moment of anger or frustration that planted seeds of self-doubt that took years to uproot. Words of encouragement or recognition that came at exactly the right moment and became foundations of confidence and identity. A teacher's dismissal or a parent's affirmation, a friend's honest challenge or a colleague's public praise. The fact that you can probably recall specific examples from your own experience confirms what Proverbs is asserting. Words carry extraordinary, lasting power, and this power is not passive, it is active and generative. Words do not merely describe reality, they participate in creating it. When you consistently speak words of encouragement over someone, you are contributing to the construction of their self-understanding. When a person hears the same negative label applied to them repeatedly, from a parent, from a peer group, from their own internal voice, they eventually begin to inhabit that label, not because it is true, but because words, repeated and internalized, shape identity. This is not mysticism. It is psychology and experience confirming what Proverbs understood long before either discipline existed. The practical implications of this truth are both sobering and exciting. Sobering because it means that our casual speech is never actually casual. The offhand remark, the frustrated outburst, the thoughtless criticism thrown out without care, all of these have effects that ripple further than we intend. Words once spoken cannot be retrieved. They exist in the air between people and then in the minds and hearts of those who heard them, doing their work long after the speaker has moved on and forgotten what was said. This is a responsibility we must take seriously. Exciting, because it means that every time we open our mouths, we have the capacity to create something good. Every word of genuine encouragement, every expression of honest appreciation, every truth spoken with love into someone's life, every prayer spoken aloud, every declaration of hope over a difficult situation, all of it has the power to create life. People who understand this become intentional about their speech in a way that transforms their relationships and their environments. They become people who consistently leave others feeling more seen, more valued, more capable and more hopeful than they did before the conversation. That is not a small legacy. That is one of the most profound gifts any human being can offer to the world. Fifth truth, pride leads to destruction. Proverbs 16:18 states a principle that has been confirmed in every generation of human history without a single exception. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Now, this is not a moral warning that has to be taken on faith. It is an observable reality that plays out with such consistent regularity that it has become one of the fundamental laws of the human story. Every great fall recorded in history, every collapsed empire, every disgraced leader, every broken dynasty, every brilliant career ended in ruin, has pride somewhere near its root. Not always pride as the only factor, but pride as the element that made the person or the institution impervious to the warnings, corrections, and course adjustments that could have prevented the disaster. Understanding what pride actually is, in the sense that Proverbs means it, is essential for recognizing it in ourselves. And this is where the work gets genuinely difficult, because pride is among the most deceptive of all character flaws, precisely because it interferes with its own diagnosis. A proud person is not typically aware of their pride. They experience it not as arrogance, but as confidence, not as self-deception, but as clarity, not as a closed mind, but as the conviction that comes from being right. This is what makes it so dangerous. You cannot fix a problem you cannot see, and pride has a remarkable ability to disguise itself. In its essence, pride is the elevation of the self to a position it was not designed to occupy. It is the posture that places the self at the center of the universe, that measures everything by its own standards, that evaluates others primarily in terms of how they relate to its own status and comfort, that cannot tolerate being wrong or being corrected because being wrong feels like a threat to its fundamental self-assessment. Pride believes it has already arrived, that it knows enough, that it has achieved enough, that it does not need what other people have to offer by way of correction or perspective or wisdom. And that belief, that sense of arrival, is precisely what stops the proud person from growing. It stops them from listening. It stops them from adjusting. It stops them from receiving the warnings that are sometimes the only thing standing between them and the destruction toward which they are confidently walking. The humility that Proverbs holds up as the alternative to pride is not self-deprecation. It is not the performance of inadequacy or the false minimizing of genuine gifts. It is the accurate self-assessment that recognizes I have been given much, and I am responsible for stewarding it well, but I am not the source of my own gifting. I am not the final judge of my own performance, and I am not the measure of all things. Humility is held securely in the knowledge that God sees everything, that other people have perspectives worth hearing, and that I am always still learning, always still capable of being wrong, always still in need of correction and growth. People who carry this posture are not weakened by it. They are made remarkably resilient because they are still open, still able to receive, still able to adjust, still able to course correct before the fall arrives. Sixth, truth, honest work, builds a lasting life. Proverbs 10:4 states a principle that has never gone out of fashion, no matter how many shortcuts the culture has tried to normalize. Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth. And Proverbs 13:11 adds a further dimension that is equally important. Dishonest money dwindles away, but whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow. Together, these verses form a portrait of financial and personal success that is entirely at odds with the dominant narratives of our age. The age of the overnight success story, the viral moment, the passive income dream, the get-rich-quick scheme dressed up in modern language and sold to millions who are desperate for a shortcut. The wisdom of Proverbs does not glamorize diligence. It does not pretend that hard work is always immediately rewarding or that the diligent always prosper while the lazy always suffer, because Solomon had observed life carefully enough to know that things are not always that simple. But the consistent pattern that Proverbs traces across its many observations about work and wealth is this: sustained, faithful, honest effort builds something real. It builds slowly. It builds without the dramatic spikes that shortcuts produce. But what it builds has a substance and a staying power that overnight success simply cannot create. There is something important about the word diligent that is worth pausing on. In the original Hebrew, the concept carries the idea of sharpness, decisiveness, alertness, the quality of a person who brings their full attention and energy to what they are doing rather than going through the motions. Diligence is not merely working hard in a brute force sense. It is working with engagement, with attention, with genuine investment in the quality of the outcome. It is the difference between showing up physically and showing up fully. Proverbs values this quality because it reflects something about character, the willingness to give your best to what has been entrusted to you, regardless of whether anyone is watching. The warning against dishonest money, meanwhile, is one that the contemporary world would do well to take more seriously. We live in an era that celebrates financial cleverness in ways that sometimes blur the line between shrewd and deceptive. Proverbs draws that line clearly and tells us that what lies on the wrong side of it, money gained through false dealing, through exploitation, through deception or manipulation, does not endure. It dwindles. This is not merely a spiritual observation, though it is certainly that. It is a practical reality. Businesses built on deception require ever-expanding deceptions to maintain themselves. Wealth accumulated through exploitation tends to generate the kind of reputational damage that eventually costs more than was gained. The architecture of dishonest gain is inherently unstable. Build honestly. Build slowly, if necessary. Build with integrity as your non-negotiable foundation. What you construct on that foundation will outlast you. Seventh, truth. A gentle answer turns away wrath. Proverbs 15:1 delivers perhaps the most immediately applicable piece of daily wisdom in the entire book. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The moment you read this, something in you recognizes its truth because you have experienced both sides of it. You have been in a tense conversation where the other person's unexpected gentleness completely disarmed the confrontational energy you had brought with you. And you have been in situations where a harsh response to frustration turned a small misunderstanding into a full-scale conflict that neither party actually wanted or benefited from. What makes this principle so practically powerful is that it describes a dynamic that works even when only one party chooses to apply it. You cannot force another person to be gentle. You cannot control how they respond to you, but you can choose, in any given moment, what kind of energy you are going to introduce into an interaction. And the choice to respond with gentleness, in a moment where harshness would be more natural, has a genuinely transformative effect on the atmosphere between two people. It changes what is possible in that conversation. The mechanism is worth understanding. When a person comes at you with anger, accusation, or hostility, their nervous system is activated. They are, in a real neurological sense, in a state of heightened alertness that narrows their capacity for nuanced thought and generous interpretation. A harsh response from you confirms what their activated state was already telling them. This is a threatening situation. Escalate. But a gentle response introduces a kind of cognitive dissonance. It does not match the threat narrative. It creates a moment of pause, a small opening in which the other person has the opportunity to step back from the heat of their emotion and engage with what is actually being said rather than simply reacting to the perceived threat. This is not the same as being a pushover. A gentle answer does not mean a vacuous one, a dishonest one, or a spineless one. You can hold your ground, speak a difficult truth, and maintain a firm position while doing all of it in a spirit of gentleness rather than defensiveness. In fact, the person who can be both clear and gentle simultaneously is far more persuasive and far more effective in conflict than the person who relies on forcefulness. Force tends to generate resistance. Gentleness tends to create openness. Learn to be both honest and gentle, both firm and calm, both truthful and kind. The combination is rare enough to be genuinely remarkable, and it transforms every relationship it touches. 8th, truth. Walk with the wise Proverbs. 1320 contains a truth about human formation that is simultaneously simple and sobering. Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. The simplicity of this verse belies its extraordinary significance. What it is saying in the plainest possible language is that who you spend the most time with is shaping who you are becoming. Whether you are aware of it, whether you have chosen it consciously, whether you agree to it or not. Human beings are profoundly social learners. We absorb values, attitudes, habits of thought, emotional patterns, and ways of engaging with the world from the people we are consistently around. This happens largely below the level of conscious awareness. It is one of the most powerful forces operating in the formation of human character, and Proverbs takes it with complete seriousness. Walking with the wise is not simply a matter of proximity to impressive people. The word walk implies movement over time, a journey shared with someone across changing terrain through varied seasons in the rhythms of regular life. It suggests relationship deep enough to include real conversation, real challenge, real accountability, and real mutual investment in one another's growth and well-being. The wisdom you absorb from someone you are genuinely walking with is fundamentally different from what you might learn from a book they have written or a talk they have given. It includes the embodied dimension, watching how they handle difficulty, how they treat people who have no power to benefit them, how they manage their emotions under pressure, how they navigate failure and success without losing their character. That kind of wisdom is caught as much as it is taught. In an era that has largely replaced deep friendship with broad social network management, the kind of relational depth that Proverbs describes here is rarer than it should be and more needed than ever. We have more connections than any previous generation and fewer genuine companions. We can broadcast our lives to thousands of people and yet have no one in our lives who truly knows us, truly challenges us, truly holds us accountable, and truly speaks into our growth with the authority of someone who has earned the right to be heard. This kind of relationship requires vulnerability, time, and consistent investment that our culture's pace makes increasingly difficult. But Proverbs insists it is not optional. It is formative. At the same time, the warning against being a companion of fools cannot be softened. Foolishness in Proverbs is not merely intellectual inadequacy. It is the orientation of a person who lives without wisdom, without reverence for God, without consideration of consequences, without the moral seriousness that keeps life on a good path. Consistent companionship with such people produces harm. Not because they are evil or because we should treat them poorly, but because influence is real and it moves in the direction of depth and consistency. If the people you spend the most time with are consistently making poor choices, living with poor values, and dismissing the wisdom that would protect them, the accumulated weight of that association will pull on you. It does not require malice. Gravity does not need intentions to work. Be wise and courageous in the stewardship of your closest relationships. Ninth truth, a good name is worth more than great riches. Proverbs 22:1 offers a countercultural assessment of value that our era desperately needs to hear and take seriously. A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. In the world we inhabit, wealth has become so thoroughly conflated with success that it is difficult even to think about this without the instinctive resistance that comes from years of counter-conditioning. We measure success in financial terms. We accord status to the wealthy. We celebrate the accumulation of material assets and treat net worth as a proxy for personal worth. And into that environment, Proverbs speaks with calm and complete confidence. A good name is worth more. What is a good name? In the sense that Proverbs means. It is not fame, though fame sometimes accompanies it. It is not a large following on a social platform. It is not the kind of recognition that comes from performing well on a public stage while behaving very differently in private. A good name, in the wisdom literature of Scripture, is the quality of your character as witnessed by those who know you most closely. The people who have seen you under pressure, who have observed what you do when no one is watching, who have experienced how you behave when keeping a commitment is costly, who have received both your generosity and your honesty and have found both to be genuine. It is what people think of you not based on what you have told them about yourself, but based on what your actual life, over time, has demonstrated you to be. That kind of name cannot be manufactured. It cannot be bought with marketing or constructed through careful image management. It can only be built through years of consistent, faithful, honorable living. Every time you keep a promise when breaking it would have been easier, you are building it. Every time you tell the truth when a comfortable lie would have served you better, you are building it. Every time you treat someone with genuine respect and care when they have no capacity to reward you for doing so, you are building it. Slowly, one interaction at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of integrity or generosity or honesty at a time, a good name is constructed. And what it becomes, over years and decades, is one of the most enduring and influential legacies a person can leave, and the converse is painfully true. Wealth without character is fragile in a way that character without wealth is not. A person of great financial resources but poor character is one major exposure away from having nothing that truly matters. When the money is gone, and money can go with surprising speed, what remains? The good name that genuine character produces endures through financial reversals, through professional failures, through seasons of loss and difficulty. People who trust you because of who you are, not what you have, will be with you in those seasons. What you have built in character will survive what you have lost in material terms. Guard your name as the precious asset it is. It is worth more than your portfolio. 10th truth: plans succeed with many advisors. Proverbs 15:22 states, "Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed." And Proverbs 11:14 reinforces the point, "For lack of guidance a nation falls, but victory is won through many advisors." This is a truth about the limits of individual perspective and the extraordinary power of collective wisdom. It is a principle that runs counter to the mythology of the lone genius, the brilliant individual who sees what no one else can see and succeeds through the force of their singular vision. That mythology is compelling, but it is largely that, a mythology. The most careful studies of successful people and organizations consistently reveal that the decisive factor in sustained success is rarely individual brilliance. It is the quality of the relationships, the feedback mechanisms, and the counsel that surrounds the key decision-maker. Every human being has blind spots, areas where our own perspective is systematically distorted or incomplete. Our emotional investment in a desired outcome makes us over-optimistic about its likelihood. Our fear of certain possibilities makes us underestimate them. Our past experiences create patterns of expectation that may not fit our current situation. Our areas of expertise make us overconfident in the domains where we feel competent and under-attentive to the domains where we have less experience. These blind spots are not character flaws. They are simply the inevitable consequence of being a finite, situated human being with a particular history, personality, and vantage point. Every person has them, including the wisest people you will ever meet. A good advisor does not simply tell you what you want to hear. A good advisor brings a different vantage point, one that can see what your position prevents you from seeing. They ask the questions you would not have thought to ask yourself. They notice the risks you have rationalized as manageable and the assumptions you have made without examining them. They have experience in areas where yours is limited. They can hold the mirror up to your thinking and show you where it is cloudier than you realized. This kind of counsel is not a threat to your judgment. It is a gift that makes your judgment better. The person who consistently seeks good counsel, who has the humility to genuinely listen to it, and who has the wisdom to integrate it appropriately rather than simply following it blindly, will consistently make better decisions than the most brilliant person who insists on going it alone. Build a circle of trusted advisors. Be intentional about including people who will tell you the truth, rather than simply affirming what you have already decided. Create conditions where honest feedback is welcome rather than punished. And then listen, really listen, to what they tell you. The plans that are built with many advisors do not just feel better, they actually work better. 11th truth. The righteous care for the poor. Proverbs 29:7 states plainly, "The righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern." And Proverbs 19:17 adds a dimension that is stunning in its directness. "Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done." These verses reveal something absolutely fundamental about the character of God, and about what genuine wisdom, when it is truly alive in a person, produces in terms of their engagement with the world around them. Throughout Proverbs, God's concern for the poor and vulnerable is not incidental. It is woven consistently through the entire fabric of the book, returning again and again with an insistence that makes clear this is not a peripheral concern for God, but a central one. The way we relate to those who have no power, no status, no capacity to benefit us, no influence to offer in return for our care. This is, according to Proverbs, a window directly into the actual state of our character and our understanding of who God is. The reason for this connection is rooted in theology. Every human being, regardless of their material circumstances, bears the image of God. The person who is hungry, who is homeless, who has been overlooked by systems and forgotten by the powerful, who has nothing that the world values, that person is made in the image of the living God. To treat them with contempt or indifference is not merely a social or ethical failure. It is a statement about what you actually believe about God. If you truly believed that the God who made you also made that person and loves them with the same love with which he loves you, indifference would not be possible. It is precisely the presence of genuine godly wisdom in a person that produces the sensitivity and the compassion to see the poor and respond with care. The extraordinary claim in Proverbs 19:17 that kindness to the poor is lending to the Lord and that he will repay it should permanently recalibrate how we think about generosity toward the vulnerable. It is not charity in the sense of an obligation reluctantly fulfilled. It is a transaction with God himself. He takes it personally. He repays it. The generosity you extend in his name to people who cannot repay you is received by God as directed toward him, and he does not forget it. This is not a prosperity gospel formula. It is a statement about God's heart and about the extraordinary economy of his kingdom, in which generosity is never a loss and care for the vulnerable is never wasted. 12th, truth. Train a child in the way they should go. Proverbs 22:6 contains one of the most significant promises in the entire book regarding the long-term power of early formation. Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. And Proverbs 13:24 adds the complementary truth: whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. These verses address what is, for many people, the weightiest and most consequential responsibility they will ever carry: the formation of the next generation. The promise in Proverbs 22:6 is not an iron guarantee that removes all possibility of a child later choosing a different path. It is an observation about the extraordinary power of early training. The path that is established in childhood becomes the road most naturally walked in adulthood. The values, the habits, the instincts, the fundamental orientations toward God and toward other people that are shaped in the early years of a human life have a staying power that later influences often struggle to match. This does not mean that people cannot change, that adult transformation is impossible, or that a person's childhood entirely determines their future. It means that what is planted early, planted deeply, and planted with care and consistency tends to endure and to bear fruit even when the soil of a person's life goes through seasons of difficulty and drought. Training a child in the way they should go is not about producing conformity or suppressing individuality. The Hebrew concept here includes the idea of training according to a child's own distinctive nature, recognizing what God has placed in this particular child and shaping that unique potential toward wisdom rather than against it. Good parenting is not the imposition of a uniform template, but the discerning, patient, loving work of helping a specific human being develop the character, the wisdom, and the reverence for God that will equip them to flourish in their particular calling. Discipline in this context is an act of love, and Proverbs is unmistakably clear that the withholding of appropriate loving correction is not kindness, but its opposite. A parent who refuses to discipline because they cannot bear to see their child momentarily unhappy is placing their own comfort above their child's long-term well-being. The child who grows up without appropriate boundaries, without the loving enforcement of consequences, without the training of self-discipline and accountability, does not grow up free. They grow up unprepared for a world that will hold them to account in ways that are far less gracious than a loving parent ever would be. The gift of discipline given in love is one of the most protective, most formative gifts a parent can give. Do not withhold it. 13th, truth. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. Proverbs 13:12 offers one of the most emotionally honest observations in all of Scripture. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. What makes this verse so remarkable is not only its truth, but its tone. Proverbs does not rush past the experience of waiting and aching. It does not meet the person in their season of deferred hope with platitudes or instructions to simply have more faith and feel better. It names the experience with honesty and compassion. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. That is real. That is acknowledged. That is not minimized or spiritually bypassed. We live in a culture, and sometimes in a church environment, that is profoundly uncomfortable with the honest acknowledgement of emotional pain. There is a particular kind of well-intentioned toxicity that responds to every expression of genuine struggle with an immediate pivot to silver linings, to lessons to be learned, to the ways God is working it all together for good. All of which may be true, and yet all of which, if offered too quickly, can leave the person in pain feeling not comforted, but dismissed. Proverbs does not do that. It makes room for the heart sickness that comes from prolonged waiting, from repeated disappointment, from the experience of holding a hope with trembling hands and watching it repeatedly not come to pass. Maybe you are in that place right now. Maybe you have been praying for something for a long time, a child, a healing, a restoration, a breakthrough in a situation that seems immovable, an answer to a question that has been echoing in your heart for years. Maybe you have watched others receive what you have been asking for and felt the particular combination of genuine joy for them and private grief for yourself that nobody quite has words for. Proverbs sees you in that place. It does not dismiss what you are feeling. The heart sickness is real, and God acknowledges it. But the verse does not end there, and that is crucial. The longing fulfilled is a tree of life. When the waiting ends, when the answer comes, when what was hoped for is at last received, the fulfillment carries a depth of joy and gratitude and life that could only have been produced by the length and the cost of the waiting. The tree of life is one of the most profound images of flourishing in all of Scripture. It speaks not of a modest improvement in circumstances, but of an abundance of life that is nourishing, that spreads its branches over everyone nearby, that bears fruit season after season. What God brings, when He brings it, is worth the full cost of the waiting. Hold on, He has not forgotten. The longing He placed in you is not an accident, and the fulfillment He is preparing is greater than you have been able to imagine. 14th, truth. A cheerful heart is good medicine. Proverbs 17:22 states something that the fields of psychoneuroimmunology and positive psychology have spent decades confirming what this verse already knew. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. The inner emotional world is not merely a subjective experience with no bearing on the objective realities of health and function. It is a dimension of human existence that has profound demonstrable effects on physical health, cognitive performance, relational capacity, and overall resilience. The cheerful heart that Proverbs describes is not naive optimism or the forced positivity that papers over genuine pain with a performance of contentment. It is not the shallow cheerfulness of a person who has never been tested. It is something deeper and more stable, a gladness that is rooted below the level of circumstances, anchored in something that the fluctuations of daily life cannot reach. In the broader context of Proverbs, this kind of inner joy is consistently associated with wisdom, with right relationship with God, with the freedom of an uncluttered conscience, and with genuine community. It is not a mood. It is a condition of the inner world that results from a life rightly ordered. The practical implications of this truth are more significant than we often acknowledge. Research has consistently shown that the psychological state of patients has measurable effects on recovery from illness, on immune function, and on overall longevity. The person who approaches difficulty with inner resilience, with genuine hope, with the capacity to find meaning and even occasional lightness in the midst of hardship, is physiologically different from the person who is crushed by despair. Proverbs knew this long before science confirmed it. A cheerful heart is not merely pleasant, it is genuinely medicinal, and the crushed spirit that dries up the bones is equally literal in its effects. Chronic despair, persistent hopelessness, the spiritual and emotional devastation of a spirit that has been consistently broken down without being consistently rebuilt. These things have genuine physical consequences. They deplete the body's resources. They compromise its defenses. They drain the vitality that makes health and function possible. This is why it matters not only as a spiritual discipline, but as a practical health imperative that we tend carefully to the inner life, that we do the work of healing from what has crushed us, that we pursue genuine joy rather than simply managing our misery, and that we allow God's presence and His Word and His community to do their restorative work in the places where we have been most damaged. 15th, truth. The plans of the diligent lead to profit. Proverbs 21:5 presents a principle that sits at the intersection of human responsibility and divine provision. The plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. The architecture of this verse is instructive. It does not simply say that the diligent prosper. It says that the plans of the diligent lead to profit. Diligence without planning is mere busyness. Planning without diligence is dreaming. What Proverbs is commending is the combination. The person who thinks carefully about where they are going and then works faithfully and consistently to get there. The contrast that Proverbs draws is not between diligence and laziness, which we might expect. It is between diligence and haste. This is one of those moments where the wisdom of Proverbs is most countercultural in relation to our age, because haste has become one of our most celebrated virtues. We admire speed. We celebrate the quick pivots, the rapid responses, the ability to move faster than the competition, and there is nothing wrong with efficiency or responsiveness. But Proverbs identifies a particular pathology in haste, the kind of urgent, impatient action that bypasses the careful thought and disciplined preparation that make action actually productive. Hasty decisions made under pressure tend to be poorly informed. Hasty investments made in pursuit of quick returns tend to be ill-considered. Hasty words spoken in the heat of a moment tend to cause damage that slow and careful communication would have avoided. Haste is not simply inefficient. According to Proverbs, it leads to poverty. There is also something important here about the relationship between planning and faith that is worth making explicit. Some people, in their understanding of trusting God, have developed an aversion to careful planning, as if planning represents a lack of faith, a reliance on human effort rather than divine provision. But Proverbs does not share this aversion. It commends planning as part of the wise life and presents it as perfectly consistent with genuine dependence on God. The person who plans diligently is not claiming to control the outcome. They are being a good steward of the mind and the gifts God has given them. They are doing their part, and then, having done their part faithfully, they trust God with the results. That combination, thorough human faithfulness and genuine divine trust, is the pattern of wisdom in Proverbs. It is not either or, it is both. 16th truth. Envy rots the bones. Proverbs 14:30 makes a declaration that is as medically precise as it is spiritually profound. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. We have already established that Proverbs recognizes the connection between the inner world and the physical body. Here it applies that principle specifically to one of the most corrosive emotional experiences available to human beings, envy. And the physiological language is stark. Envy rots. It does not simply diminish or unsettle, it decays, it destroys from the inside out. Envy is not the same as admiration. Admiration sees what someone else has achieved or received and responds with genuine appreciation, perhaps mixed with aspiration, a desire to pursue something similar. Envy sees what someone else has and responds with resentment. A sense that their having somehow diminishes your own position, that the blessing of another person is an injury to you. Envy cannot celebrate what others have because it experiences their prosperity as a form of scarcity for itself. And this posture of the heart is, in Proverbs' assessment, literally destructive to the person who carries it. We are living in the most envy-generating environment in human history. Social media platforms, by their fundamental design architecture, place us in a condition of continuous comparison, continuously exposed to curated highlight reels of other people's lives, presented in ways specifically designed to maximize our emotional responses, including the negative emotional responses that keep us engaged with the platform. Neuroscientists have documented what happens in the human brain when we scroll through content that activates social comparison. The design is not accidental, and its effects are not benign. We are paying for our social media use, among other currencies, with our inner peace, and Proverbs tells us that peace is not a luxury. It is the condition of life itself. The antidote to envy is not simply an act of willpower directed against envious thoughts. That approach tends not to work because it fights the symptom rather than addressing the root. The root of envy is the belief that God is not taking adequate care of you, that His provision for others somehow comes at your expense, that His blessing of someone else is evidence of your own neglect. The antidote is therefore a deepened confidence in the personal, specific, faithful love of God for your life. When you genuinely believe that God has a plan for you that is good, that He is attending to you with complete awareness and complete care, that your journey is yours and not a lesser version of someone else's, then other people's blessings stop being threats and start being reasons for genuine celebration. The peace that this produces is, Proverbs says, life-giving. Literally, cultivate it. 17th truth. Do not repay evil with evil. Proverbs 2022 addresses one of the most powerful and difficult impulses in human nature with a clarity that is simultaneously liberating and demanding. Do not say, "I'll pay you back for this wrong." Wait for the Lord, and He will avenge you. The desire for retaliation when we have been wronged is not irrational. It is deeply human. It is rooted in a genuine sense of justice, the recognition that wrong things have happened, that consequences should follow wrong actions, that the world should be set right. The problem is not the desire for justice. The problem is the impulse to appoint ourselves as its instrument. Personal retaliation, the settling of scores by our own hand, the evening of balances according to our own judgment, has several deep structural problems. The first is that our judgment of what we are owed is almost never objective. We are the injured party. We experience our own pain vividly and completely, but we tend to be far less aware of the ways in which we may have contributed to the situation, or the ways in which our perception of what happened may differ from what actually happened. The person who was wronged and the person who wronged them rarely tell the same story. Our version, however sincerely held, is likely incomplete in ways we cannot fully see from where we stand. The second problem with personal retaliation is that it binds us. It keeps us connected to the person who hurt us in a way that ensures they continue to have power over our peace long after the initial injury. The desire to see them suffer, to make them pay, to ensure that justice is served, all of this keeps our attention directed toward them, our emotional resources invested in the outcome of their circumstances, our inner world hostage to a drama that was finished long ago everywhere except in the place where we keep replaying it. Choosing to retaliate is, in a very real sense, choosing to remain the victim. It extends the injury indefinitely. Releasing the matter to God is, paradoxically, the path to personal freedom. Wait for the Lord, and He will avenge you. This is not passive resignation. It is an act of active, courageous faith. It is the decision to trust that the God who sees all things, who judges with perfect knowledge and perfect equity, who is not limited by our partial information or our emotional investment in a particular outcome, is far more capable of delivering justice than we are. And it is the discovery that releasing the outcome to Him releases us from the prison of our own bitterness. You are not surrendering justice when you choose not to seek your own revenge. You are entrusting justice to the one who is uniquely qualified to deliver it. 18th, truth, the blessing of the Lord brings true wealth. Proverbs 10:22 contains a declaration that challenges every purely secular understanding of how prosperity is produced. The blessing of the Lord brings wealth without painful toil for it. Understanding this verse correctly requires holding it alongside Proverbs' broader, consistent commendation of diligence and hard work, which we have already explored. This verse is not an argument for passivity or a promise that faith exempts us from effort. It is making a more subtle and more profound claim, that there is a dimension of genuine prosperity that lies beyond the reach of human effort alone, and that dimension is the blessing of the Lord. Every person who has experienced what they genuinely believe was divine provision. The door that opened when no door should have opened, the resource that arrived at exactly the moment it was needed through channels that defied any natural explanation. The relationship that formed with precisely the person whose help was most needed at exactly the right time, knows that there is something that goes beyond the sum of their own effort. There is a quality to blessing-sourced abundance that is different from effort-sourced gain. It arrives differently, it sustains differently, and it produces a different kind of gratitude, one that knows the source is not in yourself. The phrase, without painful toil for it, is particularly interesting. It is not describing the absence of any effort. It is describing the absence of the grinding, anxious, desperate, self-reliant striving that characterizes a life in which God is not genuinely trusted as the provider. There is a kind of working that is frenzied because underneath it lies a deep, unacknowledged fear. The fear that if I stop pushing this hard, everything will collapse because there is no provision beyond what my own strength produces. Proverbs describes this as painful toil. It is not just hard work. It is hard work driven by fear, without the undergirding of genuine trust. By contrast, the person who has genuinely offered their work to God, who has prayed over their labor, who has committed their plans to the Lord, and then worked diligently within that framework of trust, works with a fundamentally different quality of effort. Not less diligently, but with less of the desperate, frenzied quality that comes from believing you are the sole author of your own provision. The blessing of the Lord can accompany human diligence. In fact, in Proverbs, it is designed to offer your work to God, trust Him as your provider, work hard within that trust. and create space to recognize and receive the blessing that only He can give. 19th, truth. Protect your covenant and guard your heart in love. The book of Proverbs returns to the theme of sexual integrity with a frequency and an intensity that makes clear this is not a peripheral concern. Chapters 5, 6, and 7 form an extended, detailed meditation on the subject, one that uses poetry, narrative, warning, and beautiful affirmation to address one of the most powerful dimensions of human experience. Proverbs 5:18-19 speaks with tenderness and directness. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth, a loving doe, a graceful deer. May her breasts satisfy you always. May you ever be intoxicated with her love. And then the warning in chapter 7 about the path of the adulteress follows immediately after with equal force. What is striking about Proverbs' treatment of this theme is that it does not rely primarily on moral prohibition. It relies on the language of flourishing and of damage. The case it makes for sexual fidelity is not simply that it is required, but that it is life-giving. The marital relationship described in these chapters is one of genuine delight, a source of joy and intimacy and satisfaction that is available to those who keep and tend their covenant, who choose to invest their erotic and emotional energy within the commitment they have made, rather than allowing it to drift toward elsewhere. The well metaphor of Proverbs 5:15, drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well, is an image of a private, sustaining, personal source of nourishment. It is not scarcity. It is abundance reserved for one. The warnings against adultery are correspondingly severe. Proverbs 6:32 does not mince words, but a man who commits adultery has no sense. Whoever does so destroys himself. Not simply damages, destroys. The one who pursues what belongs to another's covenant, who follows the seduction of the moment at the cost of the commitment of a lifetime, is not gaining something. They are destroying something, their integrity, their peace, their relationships, their testimony, their future, often in ways that extend far beyond their own lives to wound children, families, and communities in ways that take generations to heal. This is relevant not only for those who are married, but for anyone navigating the waters of sexuality and relationship in an age that has largely abandoned the framework of covenant and fidelity in favor of a purely pleasure-centered ethic. Proverbs invites us to a different and richer understanding, one that sees the disciplined, faithful, joyful practice of covenant love not as a restriction, but as a path toward the kind of intimacy and flourishing that casual, self-serving sexuality cannot produce. Guard your heart in this area. The investment in faithfulness always produces a return that the alternative cannot match. 20th, truth. The righteous are as bold as a lion. Proverbs 28:1 articulates a principle of character and confidence that turns many conventional assumptions about courage upside down. The wicked flee though no one pursues, but the righteous are as bold as a lion. Marie. What this verse is describing is not the confidence that comes from strength of personality or from an impressive record of achievement or from the absence of fear. It is describing a quality of boldness that is the natural product of a clear conscience, the fearlessness available to the person who has nothing to hide. The wicked, in this verse, are not described as cowardly in the conventional sense. They may be physically brave, professionally aggressive, socially dominant. But they live in an interior state of perpetual alertness and anxiety because every layer of deception, every compromised choice, everything they have done in secret that they would not want exposed, all of it generates a background hum of fear that does not require any specific threat to activate. They flee when no one pursues because their conscience pursues them everywhere they go. They cannot be at peace because peace is incompatible with the burden of managed dishonesty. They look over their shoulder not because an enemy is actually there, but because the habit of concealment produces hypervigilance that makes them see threat everywhere. The righteous person is in an entirely different condition. Their life is consistent. What they say matches what they do. How they behave publicly matches how they behave privately. The values they claim to hold are genuinely the values they live by. This consistency is deeply liberating. There is no web of deceptions to maintain, no version of events to track, no fear of exposure because there is nothing that needs to be hidden. The righteous person can walk into any room, face any accusation, endure any scrutiny without the panic that the wicked experience at the mere suggestion of such things. Their boldness is not performance. It is the natural freedom of a life lived with integrity, and this quality is noticed by others. People sense, even when they cannot articulate it, the difference between the boldness of genuine integrity and the bravado of someone who is performing confidence to manage their own fear. The person of genuine righteousness carries an authority in their presence that has nothing to do with status or power, and everything to do with the settled peace of someone whose inner life and outer life are aligned. Pursue righteousness not primarily as a strategy for being perceived well, but as a way of living that is genuinely good and that God genuinely honors. The boldness that comes with it is one of its most precious byproducts. 21st, truth. Generosity opens the door to greater blessing. Proverbs 11:24-25 articulates an economic and spiritual principle that overturns conventional logic with cheerful confidence. One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. The counterintuitive claim here is stated not as a possibility, but as a pattern, not as a lucky outcome, but as a principle of the way things actually work in the economy of God's kingdom. Generous people prosper. The person who refreshes others will be refreshed. The person who gives freely gains more. These are not lottery results, exceptional outcomes for a fortunate few. They are descriptions of a pattern that plays out consistently enough that Proverbs presents it as a reliable observation about how the world works when it is working as God designed. And the underlying reason is not difficult to trace. The generous person is operating from a posture of abundance, a fundamental orientation that holds resources loosely, trusts in ongoing provision, sees their possessions as instruments of blessing rather than as defenses against scarcity. That posture keeps them in the flow of giving and receiving. That is how genuine prosperity is sustained. The person who withholds unduly, not the person who is responsible with their resources, but the one who hoards out of fear, who closes their hands in a desperate grip against the possibility of loss, is, paradoxically, producing the very poverty they fear. There is something spiritually and practically self-defeating about a clenched fist. It cannot give, and therefore it cannot receive. It communicates to everyone around it that there is not enough, and that communication tends to become self-fulfilling. The miser's wealth is defended so anxiously that it becomes a prison rather than a resource, managed rather than enjoyed, protected rather than multiplied. Giving generously, as Proverbs envisions it, is not about the elimination of wise stewardship. It is about the transformation of the heart's orientation toward what we have. It is about holding our resources in open hands rather than closed fists, willing to be instruments of blessing even when we cannot fully calculate the cost, trusting that the God who owns all things is more than capable of replenishing what we give in His name and for His purposes. The person who lives this way consistently finds, over time, that there is always enough. that generosity does not impoverish, but enriches, not only materially, but in all the dimensions of life that matter most. 22nd. Truth. A noble character is the greatest adornment. The 31st chapter of Proverbs closes the entire book with one of the most celebrated and beautiful portraits of human excellence in all of Scripture. The woman of noble character, whose description begins in verse 10 and runs to the end of the chapter. And the portrait is not primarily of external beauty or social accomplishment. It is a portrait of character in full flower, of what a life shaped by wisdom, faithfulness, generosity, diligence, and the fear of God looks like when it is lived out with integrity and wholeness over time. She is industrious, rising before dawn, managing her household with skill and forethought. She is entrepreneurial, evaluating property, planting vineyards, engaging in trade that provides for her family. She is generous, extending her hands to the poor and the needy. She is prepared, not anxious about the seasons that lie ahead, because she has done the work to ready herself and her household for whatever comes. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. Her husband is known and respected at the city gates, not because she has diminished herself to elevate him, but because the excellence of her character and the quality of her management add honor to everything they do together. Her children rise and call her blessed. And then, near the end of this portrait, Proverbs makes a pointed and important observation. Charm is deceptive, and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Everything else, the competence, the generosity, the wisdom, the industry, flows from this, the fear of the Lord. The noble character that produces such a rich and full human life is not the product of personality or talent or favorable circumstances, though all of those play their part. It is the product of a life oriented around God, sourced in reverence for Him, shaped by His wisdom, and given back to the service of others in His name. This portrait speaks to every person, regardless of gender or marital status or stage of life, because what it is ultimately describing is what a human being looks like when they are truly living well, when wisdom has done its full work in them, and they are walking in the fullness of what God designed them to be. That is the destination to which every truth in Proverbs is pointing. Not just behavioral compliance, not merely the avoidance of folly, but the full flourishing of a life genuinely shaped by divine wisdom. Aspire to this. It is what you were made for. 23rd, truth. Do not withhold good when it is in your power to give. Proverbs 3:27-28 contains an instruction that is simple in its expression but far-reaching in its implications. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to act. Do not say to your neighbor, "Come back tomorrow and I'll give it to you," when you have it with you now. This is wisdom about the moral quality of delay, specifically about the kind of delay that is not genuine inability, but the choice to postpone giving what could be given now. The principle here is subtle and important. There is nothing wrong with thoughtful timing, with ensuring that help is offered in the right way at the right moment to produce genuine good rather than enabling harm or creating dependency. But Proverbs is not addressing that kind of careful discernment. It is addressing the habit of deferral, the pattern of acknowledging that something good should be done, and then finding reasons not to do it yet. Tomorrow becomes a refuge for good intentions that never find their way to action. And Proverbs says plainly that when what is needed is already in our possession and our neighbor's need is present and genuine, the right time to act is now. There is a connection between this principle and the broader Proverbs theme of generosity. But there is also something specific here about the quality of character expressed in prompt, attentive kindness. The person who consistently notices need and responds with immediate generosity is a person whose inner orientation is already set toward the good of others. They have not had to overcome excessive calculation or excessive self-concern to arrive at the decision to help. Helpfulness is the reflex, not the conclusion of a lengthy internal debate. That quality of character, the promptness of genuine goodness, is both a reflection of wisdom already developed and a practice that continues to deepen it. Do not defer what you have the power and the means to do now. 24th, truth. Whoever sows wickedness reaps trouble. Proverbs 22:8 states what experience consistently confirms: whoever sows injustice reaps calamity, and the rod they wield in fury will be broken. And Proverbs 11:18-19 adds, a wicked person earns deceptive wages, but the one who sows righteousness reaps a sure reward. Truly the righteous attain life, but whoever pursues evil finds death. D. The agricultural metaphor of sowing and reaping runs through Proverbs as one of its most consistent frameworks for understanding how consequences work in human life. What you plant is what you will harvest. This is not fate or karma in the abstract sense. It is a description of the moral structure of a universe designed and sustained by a God who is just. The principle of sowing and reaping is patient. It does not always produce immediate results in either direction. The person who sows wickedness may enjoy a season in which the calamity their choices have set in motion has not yet arrived. The person who sows righteousness may go through seasons in which the sure reward their faithfulness is building has not yet been received. This is one of the features of the principle that makes it most difficult for us to trust, because we operate largely in the present tense and struggle to maintain faith in processes whose outcomes are distant. But Proverbs does not present this as a principle that sometimes works. It presents it as a principle that consistently, reliably, inevitably works, because the God who designed the universe is not indifferent to what we sow. And the moral fabric of creation ensures that what is planted eventually comes to harvest. The implication for how we live is straightforward and demanding. Every choice we make is a seed. Every act of injustice, every word of deception, every moment of exploitation or cruelty or dishonesty plants something in the ground of our lives and in the lives of those we affect. Something that will grow and produce fruit in due season. Equally, every act of righteousness, every word of truth, every moment of genuine care and integrity plants its own seed, something that will also grow and produce fruit in due season. We are always planting. The question is, what kind of harvest we are preparing for ourselves and for the world around us. Sow wisely, because the harvest is always coming. 25th, truth. The Lord detests dishonest scales. Proverbs 11:1 delivers a clear and unambiguous statement of God's posture toward business and transactional dishonesty. The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him. The directness of this language is worth pausing on. Not disapproves, not frowns upon, detests. The Hebrew word carries the idea of something deeply repugnant, abhorrent, offensive to God's character, and the specific context, the scales and weights used in commerce, makes a striking claim. God is not indifferent to how we conduct our business affairs. He has a stake in the honesty of every transaction, every contract, every agreement between human beings. Dishonest scales in the ancient world referred to the practice of using weights that had been falsified, appearing to be the standard measure but actually falling short, so that the seller appeared to be giving full measure while actually delivering less. In our contemporary world, the equivalent covers an enormous range of behaviors: misrepresenting products or services, charging for work not done, including hidden fees that were not disclosed, writing contracts designed to confuse rather than inform, advertising claims that create impressions that the product does not live up to, any form of commercial interaction in which one party is giving less than they are representing themselves as giving. The reason God's response to these practices is so strong is not simply because rules have been broken. It is because dishonest scales are an act of contempt toward another image-bearer of God, a statement that your gain matters more than their rightful portion, that they are an object to be exploited rather than a person to be respected. And accurate weights, by contrast, find favor with God, not because they are heroic, but because they are honest. And honesty in business is a basic expression of the respect for others that genuine wisdom always produces. Do what you say you will do. Charge what you said you would charge. Deliver what you promised to deliver. In a world of fine print and managed expectations, this simple standard is both a moral commitment and a remarkable competitive advantage. 26th Truth. Iron sharpens iron. Proverbs 27:17 offers one of the most vivid and practically useful metaphors in the entire book. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. A blade cannot sharpen itself. The chemistry is simple. Sharpening requires the friction between two surfaces with complementary hardness, the removal of material that has become dull through use, the grinding pressure that produces an edge capable of doing what the tool was designed to do. No amount of self-application will produce the same result. The blade needs another blade, or a whetstone, or some external surface to press against. Without that contact, no matter how fine the steel, the edge will dull and stay dull. Human beings are not different. We cannot reach our fullest potential in isolation from others. We were designed for community, not just for companionship in the sense of shared pleasure, but for the specific kind of relational friction that produces growth. The friend who challenges an assumption you have held too long without questioning it. The mentor who raises the bar of expectation beyond where you would have set it for yourself. The community of practice that exposes you to excellence, that stretches what you believe is possible. The accountability partner who reminds you when you have drifted of the person you committed to becoming. These relationships are not optional extras in the pursuit of wisdom. They are essential mechanisms of formation. In our current cultural moment, the kind of relational depth that produces genuine sharpening is under significant pressure. We have more superficial connections than any generation before us, and far fewer of the deep, committed, mutually invested friendships that were once the normal ecology of human community. The busyness of modern life, the geographic mobility that separates people from the communities they formed in earlier seasons, the substitution of virtual connection for embodied relationship, the cultural premium on independence and self-sufficiency, all of these work against the sustained, deep companionship that Proverbs is describing. Resist these trends intentionally. Invest in a small number of relationships with the kind of depth and honesty and commitment that makes real sharpening possible. It is one of the most life-giving decisions you can make. 27th. Truth. Do not boast about tomorrow. Proverbs 27:1 counsels with quiet but unmistakable seriousness. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. The New Testament letter of James will later echo this principle almost exactly, suggesting how deeply it had penetrated the wisdom tradition. The instruction here is not against planning for the future. Proverbs is enthusiastically in favor of careful, diligent preparation. The instruction is against a specific posture of the heart toward the future, the presumption that we own tomorrow, that our vision of it is guaranteed to materialize, that we can speak of future events as accomplished facts. This posture is remarkably common, and not always in obvious forms. Boasting about tomorrow does not necessarily look like arrogant bluster. It can look like the quiet assumption, embedded in all our planning, that the future will unfold roughly as we expect because we are the kind of person who makes good plans. It can look like the identity we construct around future achievements, the degree we're going to complete, the business we're going to build, the person we're going to become, without acknowledging that the gap between today and that future is filled with contingencies that we cannot fully see or control. It can look like the way we relate to the people in our lives today, as if there is unlimited time to address what needs addressing, to say what needs to be said, to repair what needs to be repaired. The recognition that we do not know what a day may bring is not meant to produce anxiety. Proverbs does not offer this truth as a reason for fear, but as a call to the kind of humble, present-tense faithfulness that is the only response to genuine uncertainty. If you do not know what tomorrow holds, then today becomes extraordinarily important. The conversation you have been postponing, the word of love or forgiveness or gratitude you have been meaning to express, these things matter now. Do not defer them to a tomorrow that is not yet yours to claim. Hold your plans with open hands. Act faithfully today. And trust the one who does know what tomorrow holds to be exactly what he has always been. Completely faithful, completely capable, completely present. 28th. Truth. Confession and renunciation of sin lead to mercy. Proverbs 28:13 contains one of the most personally liberating promises in the entire book. Whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy. The structure of this verse is carefully balanced. There are two paths and two outcomes. The path of concealment leads to a specific result, failure to prosper. The path of honest confession and genuine renunciation leads to mercy. The contrast is absolute and the promise is unconditional. God offers mercy to every person who comes to him in genuine honesty about what they have done and genuine commitment to changing course. The path of concealment is one that most of us are more familiar with than we would like to admit. When we have done something wrong, when we have failed in a way that we are ashamed of, when we have hurt someone, or compromised our integrity, or made a choice we knew was wrong even as we were making it. The default human response is not transparency. It is management. We minimize the significance of what happened. We reframe it in terms that reduce our culpability. We confine the knowledge of it to the smallest possible circle. We carry the weight of it silently rather than addressing it. And we tell ourselves that this management strategy is working because the visible consequences have not yet materialized. But concealment does not neutralize what has been concealed. It calcifies it. It gives it roots in the inner world, where it quietly shapes everything around it. Our ability to relate authentically to others, our freedom in prayer, our capacity for genuine joy, our willingness to step into new opportunities and new relationships that might expose what we are hiding. The person who is managing secrets is always carrying a weight that drains their energy and limits their freedom, even when they have become so accustomed to carrying it that they have stopped noticing how heavy it is. The invitation of Proverbs 28:13 is the invitation of the whole gospel. Come as you are, bring what you have been hiding, and receive the mercy that God has already prepared for exactly this moment. The confession it calls for is not performance, it is honesty. Real acknowledgement without minimization or excuse of what happened and what it was. And the renunciation is the turn, the genuine commitment to a different direction, not as a one-time event necessarily, but as an orientation of the will away from the old path and toward the new one. When those two things come together, honest acknowledgement and genuine turning, mercy is waiting. Not judgment as the final word, not condemnation as the permanent verdict. Mercy. The freedom that only forgiveness can give. 29th. Truth. Where there is no vision, the people perish. Proverbs 29:18 has been quoted in contexts ranging from corporate boardrooms to national policy debates to personal development seminars. And while much of that quoting strips it of its original meaning, the truth it contains is profound enough to sustain multiple applications. Where there is no vision, the people perish. But he that keepeth the law, happy is he. Indeed, the word vision here, the Hebrew word chazon, refers to prophetic revelation. It is the word used for the divine communication that comes through the prophets, the word of God proclaimed and received, the living testimony of what God is saying and where he is leading. When prophetic vision is absent, when a community has lost its connection to what God is saying, when his word is no longer proclaimed and received with seriousness, when the divine perspective that gives direction and meaning and moral order to communal life has been replaced by purely human perspectives, the people cast off restraint. That is the literal meaning of the Hebrew word translated as perish in many versions. They become unrestrained. They lose the capacity for the self-governance and moral coherence that genuine wisdom provides. Without a fixed reference point that transcends human opinion, every person's subjective view becomes equally valid. No boundaries can be authoritatively maintained, and the common life degenerates into the chaos of everyone doing what seems right in their own eyes. We are watching this play out with considerable clarity in our own generation. The institutions that once served as transmitters of transcendent moral vision have lost influence. The shared frameworks within which previous generations navigated moral and civic disagreement have largely dissolved. And in the vacuum, we have exactly what Proverbs predicts: a culture of unrestrained impulse, a breakdown of shared accountability, an inability to agree on the most basic questions of what is true and what is right, and what human beings owe one another. This is not primarily a political problem, it is a spiritual one. And its solution, Proverbs suggests, lies not in better politics or better technology, but in the recovery of genuine prophetic vision, the word of God received with humility and lived with faithfulness. 30th truth: answer a fool according to their folly, but know when not to. Proverbs 26:4-5 presents what initially appears to be a contradiction. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. The two verses stand side by side in the text, offering what appear to be opposite instructions. Do not answer, answer. This has perplexed readers for centuries, but understood correctly, it is one of the most sophisticated pieces of practical communication wisdom in the entire book. The apparent contradiction is actually a both, and rather than an either-or. Both instructions are true, and the wisdom lies in knowing which one applies to the situation you are actually in. Do not answer a fool according to his folly. In some situations, engaging with foolish arguments at their own level, entering the logic of the fool's framing, adopting the terms and assumptions of their position, actually legitimizes the folly. It lends it a dignity it does not deserve and draws you into a mode of engagement that can only reduce you to the fool's level. In these situations, the wise response is silence, or at most, a gentle refusal to engage on those terms. Giving a dignified, reasoned response to every foolish provocation is not always wisdom. Sometimes it is simply providing a more sophisticated platform for foolishness. But there is another kind of situation, and here is the other instruction, in which allowing the fool's folly to stand unchallenged will lead them to conclude that they have prevailed, that no one has a response, that their position is unassailable. In those situations, silence is not wisdom. It is the abandonment of the field to someone whose influence will cause real harm if left unchallenged. In those cases, wisdom requires a response, one that is clear, grounded, and sufficient to dismantle the pretense without descending to the fool's level. The skill Proverbs is describing is not the application of a rule. It is the discernment to read each situation accurately enough to know which response serves wisdom in this particular moment. That is a subtle and valuable art. 31st, truth, the fear of the Lord. Returning to the foundation. We began with the fear of the Lord, and we return to it now, because Proverbs itself returns to it, again and again, in verse after verse, as if it cannot quite let go of the truth that this is the anchor of everything. Proverbs 14:26-27 says, "Whoever fears the Lord has a secure fortress, and for their children it will be a refuge." The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, turning a person from the snares of death. And Proverbs 19:23 adds, "The fear of the Lord leads to life, then one rests content, untouched by trouble." Life, refuge, fortress, fountain, rest. These are not the images of a constrained and diminished existence. These are images of the fullest, most flourishing life available to a human being. The full circle that Proverbs traces, from the fear of the Lord in its opening chapter to the woman who fears the Lord as its closing portrait of excellence, is not accidental. It is the structure of wisdom itself, the arc of a life that begins with right orientation toward God and discovers along every step of the journey that this orientation is not the beginning of a limited life, but the beginning of an unlimited one. The person who fears the Lord does not walk a narrower path than those who do not. They walk a safer, surer, richer, more beautiful one. We live in a world that has tried every alternative. It has tried the wisdom of pure rationalism, of human reason as the supreme authority. It has tried the wisdom of pure pragmatism, of doing whatever works by the measures of immediate outcome. It has tried the wisdom of pure relativism, of everyone constructing their own moral reality according to their own preferences. And in every case, the results have confirmed what Proverbs has been saying for 3,000 years. Without the fear of the Lord, without a fixed, transcendent reference point, without genuine reverence and genuine submission to the God who made us and knows us and has revealed his ways to us, we drift, we get lost. We build things that do not last, and pursue things that do not satisfy, and make choices we cannot sustain and call it freedom, right up until the moment it turns to dust in our hands. The invitation of Proverbs is still open. It has never closed. After everything, after all 31 truths, after all the instruction and the warning and the promise and the portrait, the invitation is the same one it has always been. Come, receive wisdom, fear God, keep his commandments. Live with integrity and generosity and care and humility and honesty and love. Build something real, leave something that lasts, and discover in the living of a truly wise life the fullness of joy and the depth of peace and the security of refuge that the fear of the Lord has always promised to those who receive it with open hands and faithful hearts. The book of Proverbs is not finished with any of us. Its words are alive. They will speak again tomorrow in the specific situation you will face, with the specific wisdom you will need for that moment. Return to it, study it, meditate on it. Let its truths move from your mind into your habits, from your habits into your character, from your character into the legacy you leave behind in the lives you have touched, and the world you have shaped by the quality of your wisdom and the faithfulness of your love. May every truth we have explored together today take deep root in you. May the fear of the Lord be the foundation of everything you build. May your heart be guarded, and your words be life-giving, and your hands be open, and your character be true. May the wisdom of Proverbs not remain merely something you once heard, but become the living architecture of the person you are still becoming, one choice at a time, one faithful day at a time. In the grace and the company of the God who never stops working in those who trust Him. Before we close, I want to say something directly to you from my heart. If this video has spoken to you today, if any of these truths have landed somewhere deep, challenged something that needed to be challenged, comforted something that needed to be comforted, or given you language for something you have been sensing but could not quite name, please do not keep that to yourself. Share this video. Send it to a friend, a family member, someone in your church, someone you know who is navigating a season of confusion and could use the anchor of wisdom like this. You may not know the full significance of what sharing it could do in someone's life, but the one who does know will honor the gesture. If you have not yet subscribed to this channel, now is the moment. Click subscribe, give this video a like if it has been valuable to you, and turn on the notification bell so you are always the first to know when new content is released. We are going deeper into Scripture together, book by book, truth by truth, lesson by lesson, and what is coming is rich, careful, and genuinely worth your time. This is a channel built on the conviction that God's Word has something real and relevant and transformative to say to every person in every generation, and that studying it carefully together is one of the best things we can do with the time we have been given. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of a video this long, because it tells me that you are not here casually. You are here because this matters to you. And that means everything to me. You are part of a community of people from all over the world who gather in this place to learn and to grow and to seek wisdom together. That is something rare and something I am profoundly grateful for every time I sit down to create. May God bless you in your going out and your coming in. May He guard your heart and direct your steps. May the wisdom you have received today bear fruit in your life in ways you will not fully see until much later. In a decision made with greater clarity, a relationship navigated with greater grace, a moment of temptation resisted with greater strength, a word of encouragement given with greater love. May the God of all wisdom, the one who gave Solomon his understanding and who offers that same understanding to every person who asks in faith, be near to you today and in every day that follows. Until the next video, God bless you richly.